Every week, I sent $400 so my parents could take it easy. On my son's 7th birthday, they skipped his party. When I called, Mom said, "We celebrate real grandkids." My hands trembled as I shut every shared account. Less than an hour later, Dad was outside, pounding on my door. I spent years wiring my parents' money, sacrificing everything for them, until one phone call after my son's birthday shattered my world and unleashed a storm I never saw coming. It was a betrayal so deep, it changed the course of my family forever. Every single Friday morning, like clockwork, $400 left my account and landed in theirs. No questions asked. No thank yous given. It was just expected. My husband had died in a car accident 3 years prior, leaving me with our then 4-year-old son, Mason. I was working 2 jobs, barely keeping our heads above water, but somehow my retired, healthy, and childless parents, except for me and my brother, had convinced me they needed my help to enjoy life without stress. They'd sold their house 5 years earlier, moved into this fancy high-rise condo downtown, brand new appliances, a doorman, a gym, a rooftop pool. They called it their well-deserved upgrade. And for 2 years, I bought every single story they fed me. Mom said they needed help with HOA fees. Dad claimed his Social Security barely covered groceries. When they went on cruises or got new phones, I rationalized it, convinced myself they must have found amazing deals. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But cracks started to show last year. Mason got pneumonia around Christmas, and I was sleeping on a hospital chair, completely broken, barely holding it together. I called them just to update them, and my mom picked up and asked if I could transfer the money a day early. She didn't want to be inconvenienced during their getaway to Vail for a ski trip. Meanwhile, I was rationing out my PTO and praying the antibiotics would work fast enough. So, I wired the money. I was so wrapped up in the struggle of just surviving that I didn't have the strength to challenge them. But things shifted this year. I started noticing their Instagram posts, so many of them from expensive restaurants and wine tastings. Not a single picture of Mason, though. Not one. He's their only grandson. They never commented on the photos I sent, never FaceTimed, never asked if he needed anything. I began to wonder what they truly thought of us. Then came Mason's 7th birthday. We planned a backyard cookout with a bouncy castle for a Saturday. My brother and his wife came, some friends from school, even my Aunt Lisa flew in from Seattle. I texted my parents the week before, then again 3 days out. No response. The morning of the party I called. Voicemail. They didn't show up. Not even a card. After everyone left, I sat on the couch, staring at the leftover cake, Mason finally asleep upstairs. I called them again. Mom finally answered. "We don't do that kind of thing anymore," she said. "What kind of thing?" I asked, my voice tight. "Kids' parties." Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "We celebrate real grandkids." It took me a second. Real grandkids? What on earth did that even mean? I asked her. She said it was time I stopped pretending. That Mason was never really theirs. And then she hung up. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, my heart absolutely pounding. Mason's father is dead. And my parents, they had always claimed to love him. They had accepted Mason when he was born, hadn't they? Apparently not. I stood up, walked to my laptop, and logged into every single shared account. Savings. The family cell plan. A travel rewards card I was dumb enough to co-sign with them. One by one, I closed them. Transferred the money out of the savings. Froze the credit card. Canceled next Friday's wire transfer. It was done. Less than an hour later, I heard it. Pounding on my front door. It was my dad, red-faced, yelling my name like a madman. My hand shook as I locked the door and pulled Mason away from the window. I had no idea things were about to get so much worse. He pounded like he was trying to break in. Mason clutched my hand, confused and scared, whispering, "Who is that?" I pulled him behind me and told him to go upstairs and put on a cartoon. He didn't argue. I heard his small feet bolt up the stairs as my father's voice boomed through the door. "Allison, open this damn door." I froze. Not because I was afraid he'd get in, but because I never expected to hear that kind of rage coming from my father. He'd always been the composed one, smug and passive-aggressive, never loud or confrontational. But now he was stomping on my welcome mat, spitting accusations at the top of his lungs. "You think you can cut us off after everything we've done for you?" My hands were shaking. I quietly locked the deadbolt, even though it was already latched. I didn't know what he was capable of. I backed away, grabbed my phone, and started recording. I wanted proof. Something told me this wasn't going to be the last time. He didn't stop yelling. Said I was being selfish. That mom was devastated. That I was ruining the family. He called me ungrateful more than once. Said I was punishing them because I was jealous of their retirement lifestyle. That part almost made me laugh. They had me convinced they were barely scraping by, and now he was shouting about his lifestyle like I'd just taken a yacht away. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. "You think you can erase us from your life and keep our money?" Our money? The way he said it, like everything I'd given them was part of a contract. Like I owed them a lifetime subscription to my bank account just because they raised me. I called Jake, my brother. He picked up right away and asked what was going on. I didn't even have to explain much. I just told him Dad was outside screaming and that Mason was upstairs scared. I told him what Mom had said about Mason not being a real grandkid. There was a pause. "They said that." Jake's voice dropped. I could tell he was already in his car. 10 minutes later, I saw him pull up. He didn't even glance at Dad, just walked past him and knocked on my door. I let him in. He hugged me tight, then looked around, asking where Mason was. I told him he was upstairs, probably still watching TV. Jake stepped back outside. I stayed by the door, but didn't open it all the way. I watched through the crack as Jake confronted Dad. "You need to leave right now." Dad laughed, like Jake was being dramatic. "I'm serious," Jake said. "You're scaring Mason. If you don't leave, we're calling the cops." "You're siding with her?" Dad's voice cracked. Jake didn't say anything. He just stared at him until Dad finally threw his hands up and stormed off, muttering about how ungrateful we both were. I watched him disappear down the driveway and finally exhaled. Inside, Jake and I sat at the table. I showed him the transfer history. Every weekly $400 I'd sent for the last 2 years. I showed him the texts I'd sent about Mason's party, the ones Mom ignored. "They told me they were broke," he said. "That's why I gave them 10 grand last year." 10,000. I exclaimed. "Yeah, they said they'd have to sell the car if I didn't help." We just stared at each other. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I want it back. All of it. And I'm giving you half." That money was supposed to be for family, not for cruises and spa weekends. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know how to feel. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone in this. That night, Mason came downstairs in his pajamas and asked if Grandpa was gone. I nodded. He asked why he was yelling. I didn't know how to explain that the people who raised me were not the people I thought they were. "Some people don't know how to be kind, even when you love them," I said. He thought about it for a second and said, "I'm glad Uncle Jake came." "Me, too," I told him. But in my gut, I knew this wasn't over. They weren't going to let go that easily. The next morning, I woke up to 22 missed calls. 12 from Mom, 6 from Dad, and 4 from numbers I didn't recognize. There were also 3 long emails in my inbox, all from Mom, each more dramatic than the last. She said I'd humiliated them. That I'd made my father physically ill with stress. That Jake had disrespected the family and turned into a traitor. And that they couldn't believe I would steal their retirement fund. Their retirement fund. That was how she described the savings account I had opened in my name and added them to. She said I had broken her heart, that I had no idea how hard it was to raise a child alone, that I was turning Mason against them and damaging him psychologically by filling his head with poison. I wanted to scream or cry or laugh. Anything but sit there, reading her words, like they were supposed to mean something now. Jake came by later that day. He brought Mason a new set of Legos and pulled me aside. Said he had called Mom. Asked for his $10,000 back. She told me to sue her, he said. I blinked. She said that. Yeah. She said if I really wanted it, I could take them to small claims court. She said you and I are trying to destroy them because we're bitter about being middle class. Middle class? I repeated. Jake raised his eyebrows. Apparently, that's an insult now. We both sat down. He told me he'd already spoken to a lawyer friend from college, that technically he could get the money back because there was an email trail, and he was going to try. Then he said something else. Mom and Dad told Aunt Lisa not to come to Mason's party. Said it was going to be uncomfortable because of family tension. That's why she looked so confused when she got here. She didn't understand what they meant. They lied to her, too. I didn't know what to say. I'd been so caught up in my own disappointment that I hadn't considered how far this went. They were managing everyone's perceptions, painting me and Jake as ungrateful kids while collecting sympathy for themselves. Jake handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a printed bank statement, a joint account in their names. They had over $96,000 sitting in there. No debts. No mortgages. No reason to need either of us. I felt something inside me twist. Not anger, not betrayal. Just pure humiliation. I gave up things for them. Real things. Trips Mason wanted to take. A better car. A dental procedure I postponed twice. And the whole time, they were lying. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel like crying. Jake looked at me and said, if they try to show up again, call me. Don't deal with them alone. Not anymore. Later that night, I got another call. This time from a restricted number. I let it go to voicemail. Hi, Allison. This is Mom. Her voice was flat. Rehearsed. I hope you're happy with the mess you've made. If you want to apologize, we'll consider listening. Otherwise, don't expect to be welcome at Thanksgiving. You can celebrate with your fake family. That was the moment I knew. They were never going to see Mason again. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to crawl back and beg. But they had no idea who I had become. They taught me how to protect myself. They just didn't expect I'd ever use those lessons against them. The next week, things got quiet. Too quiet. No calls. No emails. No surprise visits. It almost felt like they'd given up. I started letting my guard down, focusing on work, Mason's school projects, and even allowing myself to enjoy a few peaceful evenings. Jake was staying in close contact, and he said his lawyer friend had started the process to recover the $10,000. Still, a part of me was waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. Friday morning, the day I used to wire the money, I opened my banking app to check a payment from a client. Right at the top, there was a new transaction, withdrawal, $1,200 from the savings account I thought I had closed. I froze. I had transferred the funds out and called the bank, but apparently I hadn't removed them as joint holders, and they found a way in. I called the bank immediately. After 2 hours on hold and back and forth with a rep, I got confirmation. The account was technically still open. And since I hadn't removed their access officially, they had every right legally. I hung up and called Jake. Before I could even finish explaining, he said, "You need to see this. I'm coming over." When he got to my house, he handed me a stack of envelopes. He'd picked up the mail from the condo mailbox he used to share with our parents when he lived there. One of them was addressed to him from a debt collector. Not his debt. Our parents'. Inside was a notice about an unpaid private loan they had taken out 2 years ago under both their names. Total balance, $38,000. The lender? Some sketchy boutique finance company known for high-interest emergency loans. I think they used my name as a reference, Jake said. That's how I got the letter. We started piecing it together. They weren't broke, but they were hemorrhaging money fast. Cruises. Shopping. Private medical clinics, not for emergencies, but for cosmetic procedures. My mom had gotten some sort of facial surgery in Miami last year. I remembered her saying it was a friend's gift. They had been living beyond their means for a while, but instead of stopping, they latched on to the easiest lifeline, me and Jake. That weekend, I filed a formal account dispute with the bank and froze everything for real. I also changed Mason's school emergency contacts and told them under no circumstances should my parents ever be allowed to pick him up. Then, on Sunday, they showed up again. This time it was both of them. I saw them through the window first. My mom in her oversized sunglasses, arms folded. Dad in another golf shirt, red in the face already. I didn't open the door. Jake arrived 5 minutes later. I hadn't even called him. He just had a feeling. They started yelling, accusing him of stealing me away from them. They said he was manipulating me, that I'd turned against blood. Dad said he wanted the $12,200 back, acting like it was theirs by right. Mom shouted that if I didn't want to be part of the family, fine, but that I couldn't take Mason with me. That's when Jake lost it. He stepped between them and the door and said, "If you ever talk about taking her kid again, I swear to God." They went silent. Even my dad looked startled. And then, completely unexpected, Mason came downstairs and looked out the window. I saw his face drop. He ran back upstairs. I went after him, and when I caught up, he was in the closet with his hands over his ears. That was it. I ran back downstairs, opened the door for 1 second, and said the only thing I was going to say. "You don't get to scare my son. Get off my property. Don't come back." My mom tried to respond, but I closed the door. Jake stayed with us that night. Neither of us said much, but in the morning, he made a call. Not to a lawyer, to his bank. He had decided to file a formal demand for the $10,000, but he also did something else. He contacted the finance company that issued our parents the loan and offered to buy the debt privately. "What are you doing?" I asked him. "Making sure they learn," he said. "They never taught us boundaries, so now we show them what consequences look like." They wanted a war. They're about to get one, but on our terms. I didn't even know you could buy someone's debt until Jake explained it. He'd researched everything, the laws, the loopholes, the process. That boutique finance company was happy to sell the loan off. They didn't care who bought it, just that someone paid them most of what was owed. Jake negotiated it down to $31,000 and signed the paperwork the next day. Now, instead of owing a faceless corporation, our parents owed Jake. They had no idea. He waited until everything was finalized. Then, he sent them the letter. It was short and brutal. It said the debt had been transferred and the new creditor expected repayment. And at the bottom, he signed his full name. I didn't know what reaction I expected. Screaming, threats, begging, but it was something else entirely. Silence. For a full week. No calls. No emails. No unannounced visits. Nothing. Then Jake got a letter, handwritten, from Mom. She said she couldn't believe he would stoop so low, that he was no longer her son, that I had poisoned him, that our family had been fine until we decided to rebel. It was page after page of delusion. Not a single word of apology, just excuses, guilt trips, and the same old manipulation. She said Mason would grow up to hate me, that we'd regret this, that we had no idea what real sacrifice looked like. Jake read it once and threw it away. We didn't talk about it after that. What was there to say? The revenge wasn't even satisfying. It just felt necessary, like cutting off a limb to stop an infection from spreading. But we weren't done yet. Jake pulled $10,000 out of his savings and gave it to me in cash. "This was your money to begin with," he said. I tried to say no, but he didn't let me. He said he'd rather Mason have it than see it rotting in a condo where no one cared he existed. We used part of it to fix up the car. Mason's dentist appointment got rescheduled. I bought him a telescope he'd been asking about for months. Not out of guilt, out of pure joy. Watching his face light up when he saw the moon through the lens made me feel like myself again. Like a real parent. Like I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. But then, 2 days later, Mason came home from school with something tucked in his backpack. A card. It was from my parents. They had dropped it off at the school's front desk, pretending it was for the birthday boy. Inside was a single sentence: "You'll regret teaching him to hate us." There was no return address. No signature. Just the same handwriting from Mom's letter. I saw red. I drove to the school the next morning and told them exactly what had happened. They apologized over and over and said it wouldn't happen again. I updated all the emergency contact forms again. I even talked to the school counselor and explained everything. She promised to flag any attempts at contact. When I got home, I packed up every photo of them in the house. Wedding photos. Baby pictures. Family vacations. Every reminder. I put them all in a box and drove it to Jake's garage. He was waiting with a bottle of wine and a small bonfire pit. We burned it all. Every picture. Every fake memory. Every lie. That night, Mason asked if Grandma and Grandpa were ever coming back. I said no, and he just nodded. Then he asked if we could look at Saturn through his telescope. We stayed out there for almost an hour. He kept saying it looked like it was smiling. And maybe, just maybe, it was. The silence that followed felt different this time. Not like the calm before a storm. More like the end of a noise you've lived with so long you forgot it wasn't supposed to be there. No more screaming. No more guilt. No more lies and envelopes. For the first time in years, there was space to breathe. Jake sent a final notice to our parents a few days after the bonfire. It said they had 90 days to begin repayment or he would file a lien against the condo. There was no emotional language, just terms, just law. They didn't respond. We didn't expect them to. I took Mason on a road trip that weekend, just the two of us. We drove up the coast, stayed in a cheap little motel, ate pizza in bed, and hunted for shells along the beach. He told me it was the best weekend of his life. I believed him. It was definitely one of mine. When we got back, there were 2 voicemails waiting on the landline. One from Mom. One from Dad. Mom said she didn't recognize the woman I'd become. That I'd let bitterness and jealousy rot my soul. That she hoped I'd raise Mason better than I turned out. Dad's was quieter. He said he was disappointed. That family is supposed to forgive. That I'd broken something that couldn't be fixed. I didn't listen to either message all the way through. I deleted them both. I changed my number that same night. The next morning, I messaged Jake and told him I was done. Not in a temporary, emotional way. Permanently. No more middle ground. No updates. No second chances. I had given them 2 years of financial support, countless sacrifices, and far too many pieces of myself. And in return, they humiliated me, dismissed my son, and tried to twist every boundary I put in place. There's no going back, he said. Good, I replied. Then he said he talked to the lawyer about the lien. 3 weeks later, he served them the formal notice. They showed up one last time. I wasn't home. Jake was. He told me later that Dad stood there silent for most of it. Mom did all the talking. Accusations. Blame. The usual. She demanded to know where I was. Jake told them I'd made my choice, that they weren't welcome anymore. She said, so that's it? She cuts us off and hides behind you. Jake didn't argue. She said, we were good parents. And Jake said, no, you were just parents. There's a difference. That was it. They haven't contacted me since. Not a text. Not a letter. Not a third-hand message through a cousin. Nothing. I saw a photo of them a month ago, tagged in someone else's social media, still in that same condo, still wearing matching tennis gear like they just walked off a cruise. But they looked older. Smaller. Like something had shrunk in them. I showed Mason the photo, asked him if he remembered them. He looked at it for a second and said, that's the lady who was mean about my birthday, right? I nodded. He didn't ask anything else, just went back to his Legos. That night, I lay in bed and realized I felt no sadness. No guilt. Just relief. My parents are gone. Not dead, but gone in the way people go when they choose themselves over everyone else again and again. And I don't miss them. I never will. My parents are gone. Not dead, but gone in the way people go when they choose themselves over everyone else again and again. And I don't miss them. I never will. That was the truth, stark and unyielding. The words felt like a foundation finally settling beneath my feet after years of walking on shifting sand. But even with that clarity, even with the peace that washed over me, I knew life wasn't a fairy tale. The tangled web of their greed and manipulation wasn't going to just evaporate into thin air. Consequences, as Jake had so eloquently put it, were a bitch, and they weren't just for my parents. They reverberated. The first few weeks after Jake served them the lien notice were deceptively quiet. Too quiet. My phone, once a constant source of anxiety with its stream of missed calls and dramatic emails, became a silent object. It felt like holding my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the inevitable explosion. Jake kept in close contact, a steady presence, always checking in. He'd say, "Still nothing, huh?" Probably planning their next move. And I'd nod, a knot of apprehension tightening in my stomach. Mason, oblivious to the deeper machinations, was thriving. His telescope became his new obsession, pointing it to the night sky, drawing planets and constellations in his sketchbook. That joy, that simple, pure focus, was a shield for me. It was a constant reminder of why I'd fought so hard. Then, about a month after Jake's letter, the first tremor. Not a call, not an email, but a package. Delivered to my doorstep by a courier. Inside, a professionally printed legal document. It wasn't from my parents directly, but from a law firm I didn't recognize. A cease and desist letter. It claimed harassment, emotional distress, and demanded that Jake withdraw his lien and stop all attempts to collect on the debt, threatening a countersuit for an exorbitant sum. They even tried to include me, claiming I was an accomplice in Jake's malicious campaign. My hands shook as I read it, a flash of the old fear creeping in. They weren't just going to slink away. They were fighting. And they were playing dirty, trying to twist the narrative, making themselves the victims. Jake, ever the pragmatist, wasn't fazed. "Standard tactic," he said, scanning the document later that day at my kitchen table. "Trying to intimidate us. But they're bleeding money, Allison. This lawyer isn't cheap. They're making a spectacle, not a case." He was right. His lawyer friend, Mike, laughed it off. "Typical bully move. They're hoping you'll back down. Don't. We have the paper trail. They owe the money. Period." Mike advised us to ignore the cease and desist and let the 90-day period run its course. If they wanted to sue, they could. It would just expose their financial situation further. The next couple of months were a slow burn of anxiety. Every time a new piece of mail arrived, I held my breath. Every unknown number on my phone screen sent a jolt through me. They didn't directly approach us again, clearly stung by Jake's warning. But the undercurrent of their presence, their threat, was always there, like a low hum you couldn't quite tune out. Mason started asking questions about his grandparents again, but differently this time. Why were Grandma and Grandpa always traveling? He asked one evening while I was tucking him in. Did they not like staying home? I chose my words carefully. They really love to see new places, sweetie. And sometimes, people need different things to feel happy. It was a vague, gentle answer, but it left him pondering, his small brow furrowed. I wasn't going to badmouth them to him, but I also wasn't going to lie. The truth, when he was older, would be his to understand. For now, safety and peace were paramount. I started taking evening classes online, a long-deferred dream of getting a business certificate. It was a way to channel my restless energy, to build something new for myself and Mason, rather than just reacting to the chaos my parents created. It felt empowering. I was actively shaping our future, not just surviving the present. As the 90-day deadline approached, the tension in the air thickened. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, braced for the inevitable explosion. And explode it did, though not in the way I expected. It started with a call from Aunt Lisa. Her voice was tight, a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Allison, you won't believe what your mother just did." My stomach dropped. "What happened, Aunt Lisa?" "She called me," Aunt Lisa said, crying hysterically, saying you and Jake were trying to make them homeless. That you'd stolen their life savings and were kicking them out of their condo. She even hinted that you were, well, she implied you were unstable and that Jake was controlling you. A cold wave of fury washed over me. "She's lying, Aunt Lisa. You know that. Jake lent them money, a lot of it, and they refused to pay it back. He had to put a lien on the condo to get it back." "I know," Aunt Lisa said, her voice softening slightly. "I told her I knew. I told her I saw through her drama. But here's the kicker, honey. She's calling everyone. My sister, your dad's old golf buddies, even some of our distant cousins. She's painted you two as these greedy, vindictive monsters. She even told my sister Mary that you were trying to take Mason away from them because you wanted to raise him alone without their interference. Can you believe the gall?" I could. I absolutely could. It was their classic play, victimhood, deflection, character assassination. Only this time, Jake and I weren't buying it, and neither, it seemed, were many others. Aunt Lisa, I said, my voice shaking with suppressed anger, thank you for telling me. I I really appreciate it. Don't worry about it, kiddo, she said, a new resolve in her tone. I told her exactly what I thought of her. And I told her to leave me out of her manipulative schemes. I've heard enough of their nonsense over the years. This is too far. Her words were a balm. It was validating to know that not everyone was falling for their act. But the thought of my mother spreading these vicious lies, distorting our story to anyone who would listen, made my blood boil. It felt like a public shaming for standing up for myself. Jake, when I told him, just clenched his jaw. She's desperate. This is what happens when people like them lose control. They try to burn everything down around them. 2 days later, a package arrived from my parents' lawyers. This time, it wasn't a cease and desist. It was a notice of intent to file for bankruptcy. They were trying to protect their assets from the lien. The condo was likely their biggest asset, and if they could declare bankruptcy, they might be able to tie up the lien in court for years, or even have it discharged. This is it, Jake said, studying the documents with Mike. This is their last stand. They're trying to hide the money, declare bankruptcy, and then live off whatever they've squirreled away, pretending they're destitute. But what about the condo? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Will they lose it? Mike sighed. It's complicated. A bankruptcy filing can put a temporary stay on the lien. But if we can prove they're hiding assets or that the loan was obtained fraudulently, things get very messy for them. It's going to be a fight, Allison. A long, drawn-out fight. And he was right. The next few months became a blur of legal paperwork, phone calls with Mike, and the constant stress of knowing our names were being dragged through the mud. My parents weren't just battling us, they were battling the truth, and they were willing to lie, cheat, and manipulate anyone they could to keep their carefully constructed facade from crumbling. During this time, Mason became my anchor. His innocent questions, his infectious laughter, his growing curiosity about the world reminded me what I was fighting for. I started taking him on weekly adventure days, trips to the science museum, hikes in the local nature reserve, picnics in the park. Anything to fill our lives with positive experiences and shield him from the toxic drama brewing in the background. It wasn't always easy. There were days I felt utterly drained, emotionally exhausted from the relentless pressure. But then I'd look at Mason, or I'd talk to Jake, and I'd find the strength to keep going. One evening, Jake called me, his voice grim. Remember how I said they had that $96,000 in their joint account? I remembered all too well. Well, it's gone. Poof. Vanished. They withdrew it all, in cash, just before filing for bankruptcy. My jaw dropped. They hid it. Exactly. Mike thinks they probably tried to move it to an offshore account or just stuffed it in a safe deposit box. Either way, it's a huge red flag for the bankruptcy court. It's called fraudulent conveyance. It makes their bankruptcy claim look completely dishonest. This was the turning point. Their desperation had made them sloppy. The bankruptcy judge was not amused by their attempts to hide assets, especially with Jake's lawyer presenting undeniable evidence of their hidden funds and their repeated denials of ever receiving any money from us. The court proceedings were humiliating for them, I imagined. I didn't attend, couldn't bear to be in the same room. But Jake went, a stoic observer, and relayed the details. My parents, accustomed to manipulating people in private, crumbled under the harsh glare of public scrutiny and legal questioning. Their web of lies began to unravel in front of everyone. The judge saw right through their charade. The bankruptcy was denied. Not only that, but the judge found them in contempt of court for attempting to hide assets and for filing a frivolous countersuit designed solely to harass. The original lien for the $31,000 Jake bought was upheld, and the court ordered them to repay him, with interest and legal fees. If they failed to do so within 60 days, the condo would be foreclosed upon and sold to satisfy the debt. The news hit me with a mix of vindication and profound sadness. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the principle. They had chosen greed and deceit over family, and now they were facing the consequences. Yet, a tiny part of me, the part that still remembered the good times, the parents I thought I had, felt a pang of loss. This was the final, definitive break. 60 days later, the condo was listed for sale. I didn't drive by. I didn't look at the online photos. Jake sent me a text when the sold sign went up. "It's done," he wrote. "The money's being processed. Your 10K is coming back to you, plus interest." And just like that, the physical manifestation of their well-deserved upgrade, the symbol of their lavish lifestyle built on our sacrifices, was gone. I imagined them packing their things, forced to leave the place they had so proudly shown off. I wondered where they went, what they did. A small part of me feared they might show up at my door, destitute, begging. But they never did. Their pride, I realized, was probably the only thing they had left, and they would rather sink into obscurity than admit defeat to us. The money came back. My original $10,000, plus the small interest payment. It felt surreal, like finding a forgotten treasure. I put a down payment on a new, more reliable car. Mason and I took that road trip I'd promised, not just up the coast, but across a few states, visiting national parks. We saw the Grand Canyon, stood in awe of the giant sequoias, and built sandcastles on a quiet Oregon beach. Each mile felt like a mile away from the past, each new experience a step toward our bright future. We were truly free. Life didn't become instantly perfect, of course. There were still late nights studying for my certificate, still balancing 2 jobs, still the everyday challenges of single parenthood. But the heavy, suffocating weight of my parents' expectations, their emotional blackmail, and their financial demands was gone. My anxiety lessened. I started sleeping through the night. My laugh felt more genuine, my smile less forced. Jake continued to be my rock. He got his money back, too, and used some of it to invest in a small business venture he'd been dreaming of. Our bond, forged in the fires of shared betrayal and joint action, was unbreakable. We weren't just siblings, we were partners, survivors. He was the family I chose, the family who showed up. Occasionally, I'd hear snippets of news about my parents through the grapevine, usually from Aunt Lisa, who had become a true ally. They had moved to a smaller, less opulent apartment in a different city, far from their old haunts. They were no longer seen at expensive restaurants or on cruises. Their social media, once a curated stream of luxury, went silent. They'd become, in essence, anonymous. Their grand lifestyle, the one they demanded we fund, had collapsed, leaving them with a reality they had so desperately tried to avoid. Mason grew a little older, a vibrant, curious child. He never truly forgot his grandparents, but the memories were vague, shadowed by their final, dramatic exit. One day, years later, he found an old photograph tucked away in a box, one I'd missed during my purge. It was a picture of my parents holding him as a baby, beaming. He looked at it, then at me. "Mom," he asked, his voice thoughtful, "why did Grandma and Grandpa choose to be mean?" My heart ached for a moment. How do you explain such profound dysfunction to a child? "Sometimes, sweetie," I said, kneeling down to meet his gaze, "people get lost. They prioritize things that aren't important, and they forget how to be kind, even to the people who love them most." "It wasn't about you, Mason. It was about them." He considered this, then nodded. "Well, I'm glad we're not lost, Mom." "Me too, buddy," I whispered, pulling him into a tight hug. "Me too." That night, lying in bed, I thought about his question. And I realized my parents hadn't just been lost. They had chosen their path repeatedly. They had built a life on an illusion, powered by the love and resources of others. And when that support was withdrawn, when their manipulation was finally exposed, they had nothing left but bitterness and isolation. For me, the resolution wasn't about seeing them suffer, though a part of my anger had once craved that. It was about the peace I found in severing ties, in protecting my son, and in rebuilding my life on a foundation of truth and self-respect. It was about realizing that I was strong enough to stand on my own, to create my own family, one built not on obligation or false promises, but on genuine love, honesty, and unwavering support. The silence from them wasn't an absence, it was a space. A space where Mason and I could finally grow, thrive, and truly live, unburdened by their shadow. And it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard.